Hello and welcome to the Hacking State podcast. This is your host, Alex Mershak. With me today is Jonathan Scharf, PhD. Jonathan runs an energy consultancy focused on renewable energy. And we're here today to talk a little bit about some of the work you do, but also yourself, your background, and kind of the future of different kinds of renewables, especially nuclear, coming up here into the mid 2020s. So, Jonathan, thank you for coming on and welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Great. So, you and I met not too long ago out at an event with some mutual friends, and I got to talking to you. I learned a little bit about your background, your educational background, and what you're working on and your areas of expertise. And I would say, in addition to that, you also just seem like a genuinely um, eclectic and deep person. So I'm hoping to use this interview as an opportunity to not only get into all of your professional experience, but also get to know you a little bit better, and for the audience to do that as well. So do you mind just telling us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. I really love that. That's how I come across to people. Because I mean, that's also part of the business is to be as authentic and transparent as possible. But for myself, I've sort of had a lot of wild rides in my life. Definitely was not an easy road growing up. And then I went, so fun fact for me, this is actually probably a little too deep, but you said it. I started in special education as a child,
Hmm.
and then went and drilled pretty hard in my studies when the noise of certain parts of my life were not as invasive, and then pursued a PhD and kind of went off from there. I've experienced that academia is its own beast, and then industry and manufacturing and development and that part of the industry is its own beast. And then experiencing business as well. And I've basically taken a lot of routes to understand that if you want to make an impact, especially in the renewable energy space, you have to have a comprehensive mindset to tackle it from multiple angles, not just technology, not just business, but a combination of all of them. And so that's I that's how I try to see it. And I'm glad I come off as eclectic or liking multiple parts of things because that's what I think is needed in this space.
And what is your PhD in?
Nanoengineering.
Nanoengineering. What is that? Is
Yeah, so it's a fancy
that like
buzzword.
material science?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So I got that at University of California, San Diego, and we um, partnered with the chemical engineering department. So it was very, very similar. We often had people uh, coming from material science and engineering, working on certain lab projects. Um, I also what I really loved about nanoengineering is because it was kind of this vague buzzword, it actually brought in so many people from all these disciplines. So I had friends in the same department working in bio nanoengineering, right? Working some of them actually working like the art space. So there was like art in our building. We shared it with the structural engineering that was the same building. So we were just bringing in minds from every single sector and when it came down to like one of the biggest things about I guess the advantages that I had during my PhD was that I used computed tomography for battery characterization, and that was traditionally used in the bio world for brain scans and whatnot. And so it was this ability to go into these other areas and use their tools and their experiences interdisciplinary functions that allowed me to actually graduate within a reasonable time frame.
So what was your primary research focus? What did you do your thesis on?
Yeah, so the title of my thesis was uh, Degradation Mechanisms of Energy Generation and Storage Devices. So, oh, sorry, Characterization of Degradation Mechanisms in Energy Storage. See, I don't even remember it.
Hmm.
But essentially started with solar research and then for like the first year, so basically the master's portion, and then went into battery research. And all that was kind of focused in trying to understand why they degrade.
Yeah.
So looking into something called potential induced degradation for solar. So it's pretty much solved. I'm sure maybe some solar people were like, not really, but it was like 20-year lifetime when I was in like 2016 when I started. And now it's way beyond that. And uh, one of the biggest reasons why it is when you have solar panels in arrays, the ends of the solar panels, it's like in electrical engineering, you have things in series, so basically a string. And so the solar voltage, the voltage across the panel would actually build up. So you would have 1,000 back in this day. Now it's around 1,500 volts. But
Mm.
back in this day, it was like 1,000 plus 1,000 volts and a minus 1,000 volts on each end of the solar array. So this high voltage caused actual molecules, or actually ions,
Yeah.
to migrate into the panel, into the absorber layer that's actually taking in utilizing the photoelectric effect to generate um, electrons, right? And uh, that was causing the degradation of panels. Um, so this was one of the things I started working on. Um, and then I switched into this flexible zinc-based battery, and this was actually building a prototype, but we were funded by Qualcomm and another company. And it was a zinc silver oxide, so it was basically biocompatible because zinc, silver oxide, and then water in the middle,
Mm.
uh, with a little bit of potassium hydroxide to make it a little basic. But we made these stretchable, flexible batteries that you could wear and then power a watch or power whatever. So that was a lot of fun. And then what I studied was commuted tomography, and that allowed me to study that battery, but also to study lots of different battery chemistries, from lithium metal to different types of like cathode materials to solid state. Like I was looking at every single battery chemistry. So it was kind of my loophole to do what I'm already doing, which is not staying in one little area, but like kind of be kind of everywhere and go, ooh, this is why this works with this, right?
Mm.
Um, and so that was pretty much the overall of my work.
And so you did your thesis, you got your PhD, and now talk to me a little bit about your path from that into the energy consulting business.
Yeah, so um, I was actually mentoring um, high school students during my PhD from the start to the finish. There was this one high school student that I mentored who ended up being the son of the he was the former director of Tesla San Diego. So it was his son.
Mm.
It was that connection that landed me my first job at Tesla. And I was helping to run this R&D group focused on what's called dry electrode processing for batteries. So traditionally, you make batteries sort of like you're making bread. So flour and water. So you have some powder and some solution, some liquid solution, and you make it into this slurry, and then you cast it, and then you bake it. Um, this process that Tesla scaled up was instead of having the slurry, which is actually it tends to be this toxic material called NMP, you would use it would be all dry, and you have this polymer inside that's sort of like a glue. And when you press it with some heated rollers, it would extrude, it would kind of laminate
Mm.
onto something. So I was helping develop that technology at a pilot scale facility. Um, and so basically, again, sort of utilizing this like connection-based, I think, talent that I have, and I guess I should not be afraid of saying that, but I would talk to the eggheads up because I could speak their language up in the Bay Area and whatnot, and then talk to the downstream folks, like building up that process so that it could be like large scale manufacturing. And I would, at the pilot scale, go, okay, this material, if we test it this way, it would then work for this large scale process. So I was kind of the liaison between those. When I was working there, I mean, the interesting parts of working at Tesla is no secret to folks in the industry, and I'll leave it at that. But what I was kind of annoyed by was just kind of being this guy running tests and dealing with this chaos. And I wanted to see all the areas of the industry. I also wanted this remote job because everyone was remote. I was living in San Diego for 7.5 years. I wanted to kind of get out of San Diego, which is not something people say often, but I wanted the ability to kind of look at different cities. And so it was a lifestyle choice, but also I really wanted to see this comprehensive view. My goal was never to work at an EV company, but it was to help the renewable energy transition, which I believe happens mostly from the grid perspective. So I navigated to Accenture, which was my first consulting gig, as a battery subject matter expert. And because I was seeking out, and that wasn't the only company I was interviewing with, but I was seeking out this consulting path so I could get an understanding of how everything connects together. And I really did get that from that role. Um, I think that my experience for larger firms, and kind of sitting in the room with these larger business tycoon types. I've been in so many CEO, VP situations. I've noticed this. I got exposed from a technical engineer to a sales world, and that was it was very eye-opening because in an engineering world, you're trying to be a problem solver, trying to solve some issue.
Mm,
In sales, you're trying to show, and if you're trying to do sales right, you're trying to make a mutual partnership where we both benefit. Not everyone's doing it right. So sometimes they're just trying to sell to get their sales target, and it's all about making the right promises, but not necessarily the right follow through, which is
mm.
the exact opposite of an engineering mind. Engineering mind is all about like how do we get that follow through to be perfect, right? So that was a little disheartening for me because coming from this background of I want to make an impact that is meaningful, and then I saw these things getting sold, and I was like, where does it go? Like, how do we get to this impact? Um, so that's what kind of motivated me to start my own thing where, I see this huge need for these companies to be connected together, um, from a technical lens, right? I see the need for contractors who, construction folks who are the ones doing the hard work of building the plants to know what they're building and to be able to screen out the different technologies that they want to use.
Mm,
Solar people are getting into batteries and they're like, how does a battery work? Right? Investors are trying to figure out which technology should we invest in so that it can make an impact and make us money, right? And that's the loop that needs to be closed. And I realized that if you have these bigger firms that are just trying to focus on earning their sales target, they're not going to help the industry connect in the right way. So that long answer, how I got here.
yeah. Okay. Okay. So I'm getting a little bit of the picture that you're painting for us, about kind of the advantages of going into consulting, not just from a personal perspective, but also because you have a thesis about how to actually solve energy problems. And there's kind of this you're carrying over this interdisciplinary approach that you experienced in your PhD work actually into the industry itself. And you're seeing that there's too many constraints on having one vendor with a vested interest in a particular kind of technology or a particular approach to solving a problem with the grid, kind of boxing out possible solutions that or an arrangement of solutions that would be better.
Yeah, that's completely correct. And um, y- the folks in the industry know that one of the biggest problems that they have is not actually the technology, but it's communication.
Mm,
And even all the PhD people I know, that was their experience also in grad school, was, they get to this certain level of technical proficiency. It's not the actual like technical problem solving necessarily. It's how do we loop in this person who runs this tool? How do we get their schedule like on board? So it's like, how do you get the right ingredients together to make this thing that you think will work happen? So that's the biggest bottleneck. Um, and right now, in this industry, especially with artificial intelligence, right? We are evolving so quickly that, and we don't have any glue to keep
Mm,
us uh, up to date of that evolution. So everyone is going like, wait, what just happened? What's the latest technology? And that's why I was talking about SMRs, small modular reactors, because what I'm hearing when I go to all these conferences and happy hours is the hype, right?
yeah,
Or the demonization.
right.
And none of it has any technical backing to it. None of it's saying, here are the passive safety mechanisms,
Mm,
or what's the difference between large nuclear reactors and small nuclear reactors in terms of, you know, why it's better, right? They just
yeah,
kind of say it is better and it's going to save us all, or they're going to say it's still nuclear and it's dangerous. And so give me the why. Do the digging and give me the why. And if you don't know it, we need to find those like what I'm trying to build to connect the whys together so people have an understanding and can make an actual judgment of investment or application or non-application.
yeah.
So that's very important to me.
So a little while back on this show, I had my friend Grant Deaver on, who was doing some work in energy policy, and so him and I talked about nuclear quite a bit. The show is called Nuclear Texas. We talked about the Texas power grid and sort of the regulatory burdens and the hurdles on transitioning to nuclear and getting more nuclear built in the United States. And one of the areas that is a big bottleneck is this concern over small modular reactors, right? Not just the inability to build new large reactors, but also the inability to get small modular reactors out. So can you talk to us a little bit about, I mean, we don't need to go too much into the regulatory specifics. I don't know if that's your area of interest per se, but can you talk to me a little bit about some of the, you talked about the fear and the hype,
Yeah.
and just talk to us a little bit about what the state of play is as far as adoption of nuclear and getting more nuclear built here in the United States.
The regulatory problem is a big part of it. And if you do some research, you find out there's not really a small nuclear reactor ready right now.
Right.
Uh, However, there's some prototypes that are already online in Russia and China. And the biggest part of this is because, to be frank, we have a capitalist society and they have communist, more communistic, I don't know, societies where they're basically able to get through a lot of those regulatory hurdles because the government backs it and says, okay, we're just going to push through. Now, I've been talking to a lot of folks in the military, a lot of folks who go on DoD contracts, and I'm not going to be too specific because I want to keep their confidentiality and what they've talked about, confidential. But what I will say is that my impression, if the government decides that this is high priority, the US government, it can happen very quickly.
Mhm.
And that's just because the regulatory hurdle is the thing stopping it. The other part of it is that the multiple designs that are happening, right? So there's a few companies that like New Scale Power and some others that are working on. So there's different types of mechanisms for the safety, for example, or for the coolant, right? So there's helium you can use. You can use water, and then there's the
Mhm.
molten salt. And so they're all kind of coming up with their different designs for these small modular reactors. Whereas if you had a country like Russia, um, they might go, hey, we're going to decide this is our design and full steam ahead. No pun intended. And because it's actually a steam reactor,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
Uh, but you know, here in the US, we're going to have all this competition between them. Who's going to get the funding? Who's going to get the investment, right? And that competition is actually going to stifle the adoption of it. It's going to accelerate which is the best uh, which is the best design, because that competition will kind of uh, weed out the winner, but it will also take a little bit longer. Um, the other thing that I've heard is, when I was asked, I was like, how many small nuclear reactors do we have in the United States? And I was asked this by a professor, and I said zero. And he goes, no, actually, we have 28.
You're
And I
counting the
go,
submarines?
yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And He's like, why aren't we doing anything with that? I'm like, I don't know. And it's this, I think it's the bridge between the industry folks and the US military and the government folks. And that's
Mm,
sort of where I come back to. If the government, if the US military and government decides that they want to invest in this, they will. Um, but here's the other part of it. It comes down to folks technically advocating for why or why not a technology should be applied and getting into the rooms with those folks and saying, hey, this is why this should work, right? And really outlining it so they get a clear idea. However, to get that that reception takes a lot of politics and navigation and business acumen and knowing when to shut the hell up. It's a big part of business. So um, that that is actually pretty foreign to a lot of very technical people, which I don't think it should be. I think technical people are able to do business, but it's a skill just like any other.
mm.
And so you get exposed, you get enough reps in, you're able to navigate some difficult conversations and then get into the room where you can make an impact. So that's my thoughts on, the regulatory hurdles and the hurdles kind of from that arena of what's blocking the US.
Right. So let's talk about the hype. Where are we in the hype cycle? You mentioned AI. Obviously, there's a lot of optimism. We'll see if it's warranted for the new administration, sort of turning back regulatory burdens. You've got all the sort of American dynamism, tech scene on board. And it's looking like this sort of union between Silicon Valley tech elites and the incoming Trump administration might be able to yield tremendous results and unblock a lot of the morass that we've been stuck in for arguably decades in terms of, you know, non-software technological development. Um, so where are we in the hype cycle? What's going on with the hype? And just what is your take? I'm sure that some of it you think is valid and some of it you're skeptical of.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So, in terms of the hype cycle, I really love that the Gartner hype cycle, right? So this is just for folks who may not know,
Mm,
it basically peaks and then goes to a trough. So that's it's a hype curve. So at some point you have everyone's super hyped about it, and then you have that trough, which is called the trough of disillusionment, and then you
mm,
kind of level out into this plateau afterwards, where people kind of get to reality. It's not as high as the peak, but it's this kind of like slow progress to something that's more real. I think we're maybe 75% up the first part of the peak, maybe 60%. Because I'm hearing more of so there's the people who are really in it, right? The people at these startups who are like doing it, building it out, and they're at the peak. They believe in their product and they're pushing it out as they should. Then there's the folks the whispers that you hear in the at the conferences, the different happy hours. And I think the louder that gets, the more we're at the high and closer to the top. And then I think at the top we have lots of investment. There's a lot of public known investments. There's a lot of kind of behind the scenes private investment. But we're going to get a lot of like this is a huge investment from so and so. That's when we're kind of at the very top. The trough of disillusionment is when people expect it at a certain time frame and it just hasn't delivered.
mm,
And that for me is inevitable. Um, that being said, again, if the military really pushes through, you can get some plants online quickly. Um, so yeah, that's where I think we're at. Um, I think the problem with the hype is thinking that nuclear, and this is just the hype, not the demonization, is that nuclear will solve all the issues. So yeah, apply modular nuclear reactors and it solves everything.
mm,
It's stable output and you can put it anywhere. Not really. So it is stable output. That's what makes nuclear. So nuclear is kind of the bedrock of the utilities. So it's kind of like the stable output, and then you can have kind of higher fluctuation. So you can ramp up the power for of different generation sources on
mm,
top of it. So if you know that the nominal load for the grid is something, you can kind of have that power, and then the fluctuations, you have something on top of that. Um, However, I actually drafted um, a table here just so I could make sure I get the right specs of the ramp up time. So the ramp up time for large nuclear reactors is about this is on the order of hours to days. So that means it takes that amount of time to ramp up to the specific power level.
Mm.
So in terms of power, by the way, it's about like 1,000 to 6,000 watts for large nuclear reactors. For small nuclear reactors, it's about 50 megawatts. Sorry, did I say 1,000 megawatts to 6,000 megawatts?
Yeah, yeah.
Small nuclear reactors is about 50 megawatts to 300 megawatts.
Hmm.
Of course, you can they add up in parallel, so actually you can add them together if you have multiple.
Mm.
Um, so for the large nuclear reactors, they're hours to days to ramp up to whatever wattage you need them to be. For small nuclear modular reactors, it's minutes to hours. That's kind of theoretical right now. So they're kind of saying this because they expect it to be quicker because of more surface area, the different kind of effects of it being more modular. Wind solar is seconds to minutes, but of course it's dependent on if the sun is shining and the wind is blowing. Batteries are milliseconds to seconds,
Hmm.
and supercapacitors are milliseconds. So when you have a frequency response to the grid of how quickly you need to ramp up power, you can't just rely on nuclear because you're not going to be able to respond quickly enough. Now you can get that base load power pretty stable, and I mean the it is theoretically possible, right, that the small nuclear reactors have that minutes to hours, like I said, ramp up time. However, it's still not going to be enough for some of these higher frequency response demands, which is where batteries still need to be coupled, supercapacitors still need to be coupled, and they're huge investment costs compared to some solar. Well, wind is another story, but so yeah. So I think it's not going to solve all the problems. People, I think, in the renewable space, and so here's a definition for you. Renewable means that it's renewed, right?
Yep.
So, and then because nuclear generates nuclear waste,
Hmm.
it's actually not renewable, but it's considered clean. That's the bucket it's under. So, renewable people look at the nuclear folks and they're like, I feel like there's almost in the back of their heads this little competition that they have. And they're like, it's unsafe. But I don't think it is as unsafe. Um, I think that that's sort of this wish that it doesn't compete. But at the end of the day, and this is the point I want to get across, is that I don't think it will compete at all. Is I think that they're going to be there's going to be this augmentation and this support between the different technologies. And because the demand with the AI data centers and EV chargers and whatnot is increasing so much, we don't have time to waste on squabbling within our industry. We have to do this. So that's sort of where I'm coming from.
Yeah, so it sounds to me like what you're saying is that in order to get the baseline capacity, the constant output of the grid up to a certain level, you need
Yeah,
nuclear to do that. And then once you're at a stable high output level, then there's still going to be variance in the demand that you're going to have to account for from other sources. And so really you need this whole energy stack to be working together so that the grid can flexibly, output what is needed for the given level of demand. But there's a sort of overlapping curve, which is that the general demand for power is expected to just skyrocket because
correct.
of developing industries.
Yeah, and a lot of it has to do with this idea that the more complexity you have for AI, right, the
Mm.
more it gets closer to AGI. And so how do you deal with more complexity? You have more servers that are kind of in parallel computation, and that means more power. And so and there's this other thing that I've heard. I don't know if how true it is, but what I've heard is that they'll build these, billion-dollar investment AI servers or data centers, and then by the time like 2 years passes after it's built, it's sort of obsolete because they need to do the new model anyways.
Hmm.
And so you're basically building this super high power thing that's demanding so much energy, and then you're like, okay, well now it's redundant because we're on to the more complex one, and we now need to start building. So I'm not saying I'm not gonna, to make a tax on the AI industry. I'm just going to say that like if that's going to happen, we need to be ready from an energy point of view.
Yeah. Um, so you talked to me a little bit about the communication problem and we've kind of laid out the land as far as the hype and the fear. What is kind of the approach of your business and what kind of clients are you working with right now? How are you guys playing a role in all of this?
Yeah, so a lot of it has to do with, like I said, being this technical glue between the companies. So one of I've talked to a number of developers, a number of EPCs, and so EPCs they're like, how does a battery like work, and how do we put it on
What's
a
an
site like.
EPC?
Oh, sorry, engineering procurement contractor.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
the construction folks who are doing the hands-on work. Um, so they're buying the equipment and then they're going on and building the site. And so these are rough dudes typically. They're guys or women, they're people who are very action oriented. And that's great. Like I love that. Um, but they don't have as much time to go and research every new technology, but they need to apply it. So that's sort of, I think, where we come in. We help educate and navigate where they should go. Same thing with the developers, right? Lots of solar developers. Now I've heard from the beginning, oh, well, we don't really have a lot of what's called BESS projects, so battery energy storage systems. So
Hmm.
for anyone listening, BESS stands for battery energy storage systems. It is not the same as EVs. So BESS has, from a colloquial sense, just pinned itself to stationary storage, typically grid. So we're talking about large batteries that are just staying there, not moving in a vehicle, right? Um, and I think some recruiters need to hear that because they're looking through their job descriptions and they see BESS. They don't even know what it is, but they're just looking at it, looking for the person who has that on their resume. But sorry, going back to what I was saying, I've heard the solar people going, well, from a developer lens, sometimes we pair with batteries, but it's really not common. And that was like maybe 8 months ago. And now I'm going one-on-one with these solar people, and they're like, we need to figure out how to do batteries, And so it's this drastic switch. And I knew it was coming
Hmm.
because I'm looking at data, I'm looking at the exponential trends. But when you have a technical background and you understand statistics and how these things work, and you're going, okay, this is going to happen because I know about where we're moving, and then people are just kind of catching up to that fact, right? You have to then kind of meet them where they're at and go, okay, so you're looking for this. How do you make it happen, right? So you've decided that you want to invest because from their point of view, investing in any new technology is a big risk, right? And so even if I come at them with my fancy PhD and I'm telling them, you should invest in this because I'm so smart and I know, right? They're not going to take that. They're going to wait until the indicators are pretty clear and then start to make that move. So our job is to make sure that we can efficiently and so quickly and efficiently help them navigate when they decide to make these next steps. And it's to connect them with the financial advisors or the people who are making the investments, the law firms. So that's like figuring out the Inflation Reduction Act or IIJA for compliance with tax cuts for their so they can have a better investment opportunity. There's grants, right? So there's a lot
Hmm.
of different ways that we can support. The other thing that we do, and this is very unfortunate in seeing bigger firms not do this, is we're leveraging machine learning. We're leveraging artificial intelligence, and we're doing that in-house. So other folks, they say like you go to some of the bigger firms, I'm not going to name them. You go to their website and you see generative AI everywhere. Some
Yeah.
fancy video with like different colors and it's all abstract and you're like, "Whoa, they must be doing some cool stuff." In the company, the consultants don't have any of that. They're and it's part of it is a security thing, right? They're too big to fail. And so they're like, "Oh, well, we can't adopt this because we're scared." It's
Mm.
like, okay, great. You don't understand the technology. That's good for us because what we do is we actually like build smart databases that say, hey, this supplier has a 2 week lead time or says a 2 week lead time, and it's actually four. Now we're actually going to predict based on our history how much risk there is to whether or not it is two or whether or not it's four. And that doesn't mean that you don't go with that vendor because your intuition, if you're kind of emotional about it, is going to be, hey, they're not telling me the truth. I'm not going to go with them anymore. But even if they're 4 weeks for their lead time, another vendor might come to you with a 6 week timeline and
Yeah.
say, hey, we're 6 weeks, and they're honest. But it doesn't matter because you've baked in the risk for the 2 to 4 week timeline. You know the variance, and it's still going to come sooner than the 6 week. So you need to have the tracking so you can make sure that all these companies are working in a way that you're accommodating for that risk. And we use machine learning, we use smart databases, we use generative AI and different types of AI because there are many different types of AI.
Yeah.
Um, and that's where consulting is going to go. And that's what we're doing now.
That's pretty incredible. I had a startup this past summer called Lawgiver, and we were focused on applying AI to legislation. And one of the areas that we would have expanded to had we continued down the trajectory that we were on was eventually going to be regulatory affairs
Be first.
and sort of
Yeah.
servicing different industries. Energy would have been one of them, space, others, that have like very deep and very sophisticated regulatory burdens. And just going through and building out these systems for helping them do that. So I'm actually kind of surprised that your shop is doing that as well and developing your own ML systems for getting that done. So props to
It's
you. But
it's natural progression. And
yeah.
and people on board like what you were doing. It, it and I mean you see this on LinkedIn all the time. I feel like I got rid of Instagram, I scroll LinkedIn.
I don't, that sounds like a quality of life reduction, but
Right, exactly. So, and all these videos are like, if you don't, you won't get replaced by AI. You'll get replaced by someone who
yeah,
uses,
yeah. Hmm.
right? And that, I feel the same way with the companies. Actually, going on that a little bit, the bigger firms, I think that they think that they're just going to gobble up those companies that are using artificial intelligence, acquire them, and then move with that. I don't think that's going to work because it's evolving so rapidly. But by the time you try to acquire and assimilate this company into your very bureaucratic and terrible, like big firm culture, by
Yeah.
the time you do that, they're not going to be as efficient. And let's say it's 2 years later, AI world's completely changed. So you need to start to adopt this whole as a whole company now. You can't really wait and then go, oh, they worked and we're going to take them. No, it's not going to. But that our speed of development is too quick for that model. And I really hope that people start to realize that so we can. I don't know. Maybe I don't because maybe it's better that we don't have these big tycoons that are too arrogant. I
Yeah,
don't
I
know.
mean, I think and this is my assessment from spending about uh 10 months this year working on the startup and then another year prior to that working on AI applications inside of my previous company. I do believe that this idea that these like foundation model companies, OpenAI, Anthropic, Google, X, whatever, are just going to eat everyone up, and everyone's just going to use like ChatGPT for everything is nonsense. What's really going to happen is there's going to be strong verticals built up for particular use cases. And companies like yours and other small companies are basically going to get really, really good at doing the thing in their industry the best with these with new AI tools. And
Yep.
then, yeah, there's going to be consolidation. There's always consolidation. There's always, buyouts that are happening here and there. But ultimately, what's going to happen is you're going to have a whole field of very diverse AI tools that are tailored to specific industries, and that's what's gonna continue into the future. That's my belief.
No, I completely agree. And I think the API calls are you can really do a lot of customization that way, right?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, with prompt
I,
engineering and RAG pipelines and things like that.
I took like literally 30 minutes to use GPT to code a Python script to digest RSS feeds from a bunch of sources
Hmm.
so that I can have a weekly newsletter.
Right.
Um, and you can do that so quickly if you know just the basics of coding, and you're not the one even coding. You just have to review the code and make sure you can debug it a little bit. So it's really we have such a modular approach, and I think that that's going to happen with coding too. Is you're going to have a lot of these low code things where you kind of just at some point you're just going to verbalize, I want this. It's going to take it, digest it into generative AI, build that code out, and then you have your customized app just like that. Um, and that's going to shake up the world a lot too. Um, and I think what's going to happen is we're all going to be calling these APIs for, like you said, specific functions because different models have these specific functions. And we're going to do it with our all of us are going to have our own kind of customized platforms that we've created because we don't need to know coding to the extent that we used to.
Yeah, and proprietary data is basically becoming the new gold because all the stuff that's out there on the internet has already been trained on. What really matters is like, do you have a real data set, not synthetic data, that is actually novel and relevant to the thing you're trying to solve?
Yeah, very true. And actually, I wanted to touch on from a consulting lens, right? I can go on ChatGPT and tell me how does nuclear fission work, and it'll tell me.
Hmm.
Just because it tells you doesn't mean you understand it. That's number one. Number two, you have to know the right questions to ask.
Yeah,
And it's sort of like Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. It's like what was the meaning of life was it 42?
42. Yeah,
So they and it's like, but now you need to know the right question. You
right.
got the answer to life, but you didn't have the right question to it. And that's exactly where we're at now, is we have this Einstein in everyone's room who knows everything and anything, but you don't know how to query it appropriately. Um, and we also are in a time crunch. Are you going to be learning how, with this infinite information source, all this knowledge when you have a finite amount of time and attention? So instead of trying to be your own consultant and understand every subject matter out there, you get those folks who can talk the language, and that's their full-time job to be at the forefront of understanding all this technical information. So that's where we're headed is we're going to be masters of querying, not necessarily masters of um, memorization and regurgitation from our own memory, but from a big data source that we can effectively query more efficiently. Um, and that's why I think that consulting firms that aren't adopting this are going to suffer the most because they're going to keep using their own background and knowledge and not be querying this infinite source. And that doesn't mean you don't critique the hallucinations that are possible. You still do that, but it's going to be a lot more effective and efficient if you are able to adopt those AI platforms.
Yeah, I like this emphasis on asking the right questions and having actual domain knowledge, like understanding of what you're doing. I think people are a little too naive about how much they can do when they know nothing. I hear from people who think that they're going to build a really crazy app all on their own. They know nothing about coding,
Right.
and that as long as they can just keep asking chat to debug it for them, they'll get there. And I know that it has happened before. There are examples of people on the internet who supposedly built something and it worked for them and they got it
Yeah,
going and they got some traction enough to eventually hire real developers. But the thing is that like someone who already understands what they're doing has so much more insight into the problems that they're trying to solve and like you said, the questions to ask that
that's right.
they're just going to be leaps and bounds ahead of you. Like AI is just an accelerant. It's
Right.
not a replacement for understanding.
Yeah, was the is a Malcolm Gladwell book, Outliers, and he
Hmm.
talks about your IQ being something that is this innate ability to help you accelerate and be the top of your field, but it's not the thing that decides it, right? So it's similar to being a basketball player. It's like, okay, you're very, very tall. You may have the potential, but you have to be good at basketball. You have to practice. You have to have this discipline. And I see it sort of like the same way. It's like you have to have this baseline ability to know what you're talking about and whatever it is, and then use the right tools and develop that skill by querying and kind of having this digital AI assistant for that purpose. But if you're trying to do it without that baseline, you're gonna have a hard time. Like if I'm 5'1" and I'm trying to join the NBA, it's like that may not work. I'm sorry, but that's going to be very, very hard compared to someone who's close to 7 feet. Um, and knowing that is going to be your saving grace. Because if you try to force the square block and the circle hole, it's not going to work very well from a strategy and time efficient point of view. So I think that the number one thing, and this is a personal thing, that I try to follow is not to let my ego stop my ability to help and impact others, myself, and the industry as a whole, the community as a whole. So when you think that you're the best and you can solve everything, I've had a colleague get asked a question, uh, what else do you need to know about batteries? And their response was, I don't need to know anything more. I know it all. That is a sign of a bad egg, in my opinion. If you don't think that you need to know more, you've already lost because you're stopping yourself from knowing more. If you think you can do it all on your own, we're past the time where a scientist can write an equation on a board and change everything. We need to work as teams because not, I mean, Blue Origin just launched their rocket. Was that one person? No, it was so many people. Sure, there was some amazing leaders there, but we need to work with each other. And that comes with putting your ego aside, relying on the right people, assessing the right people properly, but relying on them to help build your vision.
Yeah. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think it's important to learn about what you don't know and bring in other people where it's needed. So, Jonathan, what are you most excited about in the future?
It's actually it's always the broad questions that get me. Um, I think I think we're in this rapid culture shift. I think we've been in this trough of disillusionment in a lot of areas of culture and tech. And I think we're kind of waking up. I think it's a little bit of a rude awakening for a lot of people. But I think what comes of it is going to be really beneficial overall. But I think there's going to be a lot, honestly, I think there's going to be a lot of pain. I think I'm not a big fan of big social media technologies, or I think that they need to be kind of reeled back a little bit. Real. But and I think that especially when it comes to workforce development, it's been very challenging to find the right people to build these projects because we've had so many younger people get stuck on, feedback loops for their reels or whatnot, and they're just not as focused on collective vision as they used to be. No, I'm in Austin, you're in Austin. We see a lot of very motivated people, but I think across the United States, we're we've lost a little bit of that, but I do think that through seeing that loss, we're waking up and we're starting to realize how do we get to a better place. And so I'm really excited for that momentum. That book, Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt, it's a great book. It's about social media technology affecting young kids, and now there's legislative movement. Let's see, it's the 18th, so it's just tomorrow is supposed to be
TikTok
the
ban.
yeah. So, I think that there's a lot of different avenues that we're taking to actually try to address some of these issues. And then I think that usually once you have this kind of rebound, it's pretty stark to go in the other direction. So I'm hoping that accelerates us towards um, a more productive society, and I'm excited to see that.
Yeah, well, so am I. I wrote an article maybe a year and a half ago called TikTok is a dual use weapon. And I don't know how widely shared that article actually was, but I hope that it helped bring about the changes that are occurring right now. Um, okay, so it sounds like you're optimistic that this sort of pulling back of some of the excesses of our technological obsession, uh, and really obsession with kind of shallow technological engagement, will help sort of bring the next generation into more long-term thinking, more focused skill development, job, you know, uh, searching, um, these kinds of things. It sounds to me like what you're saying is that there's been a shortage of skilled labor in certain parts of your industries,
Yes.
and you're attributing a lot of this to the fact that the younger generation are distracted. They're on TikTok, they're on Instagram, they're smoking too much weed, whatever. Like,
Oh, the darn drugs. About I think so there's a lot of issues for this. I think I point a big finger at the way that we're recruiting too.
yeah.
Um, I partner or actually in negotiation partnering with a really I think a really good recruitment agency, but um, a lot of them, like I said before, with the BEST acronym, it's like they they have AI bots screening the applications. We have AI bots creating the applications, and now you have these brilliant people getting ghosted on job interviews, never getting seen. Like some of the smartest people I know, and they're just struggling to find anything. And then I have people who are in the positions that I talk to who are like, we can't find good talent. And I'm like, that's because your connection mechanism is totally screwed up. And so I think it's a combination. We are kind of losing our ability to focus and drive hard. But we're also we're not connecting and providing the right value assessment for the people that are coming in.
Yeah.
Um, and that one I haven't seen enough pull like a rebound away from that yet in the recruitment world. Um, I hope that big businesses know that when they invest in this forever search of candidates, they're losing a lot of money. And when they try to hyper focus on finding someone with a very, very particular skill set, right? And it doesn't match like a cultural thing or a mentality thing, like that person's not really interested in working, they're using the system and then they drop out a year later that costs so much money too, because you put all this upfront investment into bringing this person into your company, and then they just leave you high and dry because you actually weren't screening for the right candidate in the first place. You were trying to find a, lithium metal battery expert, and there's like a few of those currently looking, instead of just looking for a battery person in general that you can train into that role or have them, self-teach a little bit because they're brilliant.
Mhm.
Um, and that's just an example from knowing the battery industry, but also many other areas where it's like you have these brilliant, passionate, compassionate people as well coming out, and then they're just being ignored. And then you find that there's like some guy that like just knew someone, got a job, and is terrible at their job, but is making bank. And
Yeah.
it's
Many such
that
cases.
what?
Many such cases.
Right. And well, I mean, this goes back into it's important to network and be in person now because this digital applying doesn't work. but there's something needs to replace that because it isn't working. And not everyone is good at networking, and not
Mhm.
every position should require someone who's sociable. There's lots of things where an introvert is a way better pick.
Yeah, we're
So,
not hiring for networking ability in most jobs.
right. And so if someone really needs to go to like 10 different happy hours to find someone interested, that's messed up. So we need to fix that.
Yeah. All right, Jonathan, where can people find you and where can they learn more about your company, maybe get in contact with you if they're in the relevant industry?
Yeah, so you can go to my website. So it's scharfenergy.com. So it's spelled Scharf. I know I'm making everyone pronounce it, and they're going to say Scarf. It's fine. I've gotten used to it. So scharfenergy.com. We have a Twitter. I don't ever use it. But and you can just reach out to me as well. So Jonathan at Scharf Energy Consulting. Google us, you'll find us, and yeah, just get to know who we are. And we're very laid back. We have a lot of brilliant PhD level people, but we hire based on our ability to communicate as well as be technical experts. So we're here to really understand you. I know I talked a lot during this podcast, but we're typically more listening to what's going on than talking. So I really recommend just reaching out and getting to know us.
Awesome. Thank you so much.